You go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. I grew up in the state of Idaho, a small town called Hagerman, Idaho. I suspect that the population of the town was maybe 600 people. So I went to school there, and actually I was quite involved in all kinds of things, athletics, music, and you name it. But the things I remember most was I was in athletics. As I went out there in I was quarterback and captain of a football team that was undefeated and untied. And that was one of my big pleasures. And then I went on from there into basketball, and danged if I wasn't made the captain of a team, and darned if we didn't go to the state tournament. We didn't win it, but we moved through a lot of sub-districts and district games as winners to get to the state tournament. And yeah, and also on top of that, see, when I was a junior, I was a junior class president. When I was a senior, I was a student body president. I was pretty mouthy.
What does that mean?
Talk about anything and anything.
Pretty what?
You name it.
Okay.
I knew everything about everything. You know, at least I thought I did. But I learned later on that I had to change my mind on a lot of those things. But back then I was pretty cocky. So when I grew up in living by the Malad and Snake Rivers, and when I was a kid, I do a lot of fishing, and I can still remember I used to always have the refrigerator full of fresh trout. And whenever it got low, my mother would say, "Son, I'm getting low on trout in the refrigerator," so I'd go down and fly fish and bring back the limit 20 or 21 trout and fill the ice box for her, and he was happy. And we had our own cow, and my dad had a horse. We had a cow and probably 100 chickens or something. They used to come in big round things when they were just little fur balls, and of course, as they got to the nice eating age, then I would have to chop their heads off and clean them up a little bit and give them to my mother. And
was your father a farmer?
no, my dad was worked for a power company. He was a electrician, high electric power lines and stuff like that. And back then, a lot of the problems were these big bald eagles would fly over these power lines, and their wingspans would be like 10 feet or something, you know. And if they touched one wire, that was all right, but if two wires had hit it, they fried them right there, and then of course all the wires would burn up, and the power went off, and people's houses went dark. And so my dad would fix it up and get it back going. So that's the kind of work he did. Oh, and I remember things back then. He used to take me out some days when he was patrolling, and he'd say, "Come on, son, you go with me." And so I'd go out with him. Can you imagine anybody, company letting one of the employees taking a young son, like maybe in the 4th or 5th grade, out with him? And of course, I learned to drive cars because sometimes he'd get out and walk places that the cars couldn't go. And so I'd drive the pickup truck around and meet him a couple of miles down the road somewhere. So I learned to drive and do a lot of those things when I was really young.
Were you an only child?
No, I had an older brother who was actually about 9 years older than me.
Okay.
good brother, and he and I got along fine.
So, you said your dad was in electricity?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as we know, right, that electricity had not been around very long. Your dad was in a big business then.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Oh yeah, I can remember a lot of the farmlands, you know, they didn't even have electricity. They had kerosene lamps and pot-bellied stoves and you name it. And if you wanted hot water, you'd boil it. And if you wanted water, you'd go outside and pump it up and get you the water. And, I know what farm life was work. In fact, that was always employment for me as I got a little bit older, working on farms during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And fall there'd be harvesting, and in the spring there would be planting, and then the weeds would grow, and yeah, and then you cut them out, and then you had a harvest. And